My name is Tony Fulmer, and I have been here now at Luther Village happily for 4 years. And one of the conditions of my purchasing a villa here was that I could have some kind of a garden. I couldn't bear to leave my house in Deerfield and not have soil to work in and not have some plants. So it's scaled back from the 2/3 of an acre I had in Deerfield. I call it my gardenette. So I've gone all the way around the perimeter of every wall surface. And my next door neighbor was good enough to say the bed to her front door, which had one hosta in it and lots of bare soil, when I had been here a couple of weeks and went to her and said, would it be all right if I did a garden? And she said, well, you can do it, but I can't maintain it. I said, I'll design it, I'll plant it, I'll pay for it, I'll maintain it. And she said, you're golden. So we called that the Nell Shade Garden. And I had a little bit of a ulterior motive because that's the only shade I have. So I still have my shade garden and then everything else is sun. So it's really a happy situation. And I keep gathering a little soil here and a little soil here and shrubs that Garden Pros doesn't do to my satisfaction. They get cut back and all of a sudden I have 3 or 4 or 5 more square feet. So it's a really good situation. So what I want to do today, my goal would be for you all to go home with 1 or 2 things that maybe you haven't been doing that will make you a little bit more successful and make you or help you have pots that look like this. Don't your pots all look like this by the end of the summer? Yeah, I was afraid of that. I was afraid of that. Okay, so the first thing that we need to understand, one of the very most important things, is how much light is your situation getting? Is it full sun? Or is it partial shade, or is it shade? And people tend to have, if you ask 10 horticulturists their definition of what sun is and what shade is, you get 10 different answers. So for our purposes here, does everybody have a handout, by the way? Okay. Sun is 6 or more hours of full sun. It doesn't matter if it's morning. It doesn't matter if it's afternoon. But just remember that afternoon sun is much, much hotter. So you need to keep that in mind when you're starting to think about making plant selections if you're going to do something you haven't done before. And that's not filtered, that's direct. So that's not from overhanging shade from a tree. Shade is 4 to 5 hours, and that can be filtered or that can be largely sun. But you need a whole different, and we have this later here in your handout, a whole different list of choices that will work there. If you're not sure, and I know this, this points out my OCD side, but I've been in retail for 55 years in garden centers, so I've pretty much heard it all. And so over the years, I've developed my own little things, and I have made people keep a legal pad on a day when they're home in the summer, after the sun, after the trees, if there's some shade coming from trees, after the trees have all leafed out, so you know exactly how much sun is going to be there for the growing season. And you make a little grid at 15-minute intervals, and you go to the window, and you look at that spot, and you have full sun. Check that off, and at the end of the day, you add up how many hours of direct sun hit that site. And then you can perhaps you may be surprised. It's always been a surprise to me how people have lived somewhere for 10 or 15 or 20 years, but you ask a husband and wife if there's sun there or not sun there, and there's widely divergent opinions. And the wife is usually right. So in addition to matters of sun and shade, you want to think about mitigating factors. There are things that change even a fairly cool morning spot with sun, you want to look at things like wind tunnels, which we have here with the mid-rises. You want to think about if you're on the ground floor, if you're next to air conditioning units, or anything that's going to give you additional blowing hot air when it gets 95 or 100 degrees out. If it's sitting on a patio, south or west facing, that's going to heat up much more than something that's on an east side. So you're going to have to be prepared to water more frequently on a south or west unbridled sun situation. Containers. Containers are a matter of aesthetics, and there's such a wide range of types and styles and colors and materials now. I think one of the things that you all have to think of that are in the mid-rises is weight. You know, it's the weight on the balcony and it's the weight on getting the container there. And when it's full of soil and you have 6 or 7 or 8 of them, is the engineering of that going to support that kind of weight. So concrete is probably for those of us that have patios or ground level, and they're doing wonderful things with colors now. They're beautiful, beautiful styles, and they're getting much more contemporary. They used to be much more Grecian and ornate and flowery and whatever, but there's some wonderful things out there. And concrete doesn't dry out quickly. That's one of the main advantages, and it will never blow over. But you have to get it in place first. Plastic is getting better. It's still plastic, but plastic now looks like terracotta to the point where you almost have to go up and touch it to tell. And the colors are very good. And the nice thing about it is it's lightweight. So if you have to schlep it up to the 4th floor, you can get it up to the 4th floor when it's empty without having the weight problems of other containers. Terracotta is very natural. It's very beautiful. It dries out quickly because you've got those pore spaces all around. So you're going to be watering. If you're going to do something in a beautiful clay pot, you need to expect to be watering more when it starts getting hot and windy in the summer. And then ceramic. The colors in ceramic are amazing. Styles, and they're even doing small ones that you can put out. One of the things that I should say is if you get something that, I'm going to repeat this twice. All containers, whether it's a houseplant or whether it's out on your patio, should always have holes. But you have to be careful because a lot of times, the ones that even have holes, they also have an attached saucer. And that attached saucer, the water fills up in there and overflows, but there's still water sitting in the bottom. And this is something else I will repeat because I can't say it too many times. It's as important for roots to get oxygen as it is for our lungs. So whether it's a houseplant or whether it's that pot in your container, if there's water sitting in there for more than 30 minutes, that plant is constantly absorbing that water and you're losing roots. So you should always, 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 after 30 minutes, the saucer, the plant and the soil will have absorbed all the moisture that it can hold, and it should come out. And so you have to watch. And hanging baskets, those plastic hanging baskets almost always have clip-on saucers. So you think, oh, well, the water's all drained out. Go back after 30 minutes. If you've really watered that thoroughly enough that water goes into the saucer, you'll be able to go back and tip that saucer and water will come pouring out. So you always want to pour that drainage water out after 30 minutes. Number 4 is just more of a quick list to maybe save some questions about right time, right plant, right place. So I've got a sun list there, and I've got a partial list for partial shade or shade. And I would take this time to say in there I've included, everybody's been coming and saying, "Well, isn't this a pretty container?" Well, with the exception of the snapdragons and the calibrachoa and the petunias, all of the rest of these are going to kind of fade away in direct correlation with heat. So I think we have gotten into a thing where we plant for growing season, so May all the way through till frost, or some of us are more adventuresome and actually are very creative and pull the annuals out and put mums in, which has never been done before. But you can actually have 3 seasons of color on your patio. So don't be afraid. So for example, this container did not have to go in the other night. All of these plants will take frost. So there are included in this right plant, right place. And some of them are snapdragons, stocks, the incredible ranunculus that look like little roses, the osteospermum. Those are some of the things that, and the other thing too is what we call cheater bulbs that the growers plant in the fall. They keep them in cold storage all winter, and they bring them out right now. And you see the little tete-a-tete daffodils and the little hyacinths. And this is really nice when you stick a pot of little bulbs in there. It gives you a whole different feel, and it adds a little bit of seasonality to it. This seems pretty straightforward, I think, but design considerations, you should have a focal point, and generally speaking, you achieve that focal point by height and size and or texture and perhaps leaf color. And it doesn't have to be centered in the middle of the pot. If you're going to have this container up against a wall, you may want to pull that all the way to the back, then do your mid-tier things, and then do the tumblers or the weepers. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a collar all the way around the pot. You just want, even if it's just 1 or 2 plants that later in the season start tumbling over and soften that hard architectural look of the pot, it's a really much more complete look from the height to the center and then down, so it really extends the volume and mass of the plants that are in there. And this is a hard one. If you only have 1 pot on your patio, I'm sure you'd all like to have things that are multicolored. But when you have multicolor like this, your eye tends to dart back and forth. Your mind, your brain doesn't read this. It's sorting things out and sorting colors out and seeing colors differently and other colors less. So if you're really trying to get the most impact with 1 pot, use 1 color. Make it all pink, make it all white. And I know people think, oh, white, it's so boring. White has the highest visual attraction of any color. So in a container, if this had a white flower in here, I guarantee you the first thing you would see is that white plant. Your eye would be drawn into that. So just something to think about. Everybody thinks, oh, if I put a red pot, that'll be just great. And it will be if it's all red. But white, really, you might be surprised. And of course, if you want contrast, if you want people to really be jarred is probably not the best word. You don't want your pots jarring people, but use things that are opposite, contrasting on the color wheel. Blue with purple, orange, yellow with purple, blue with orange, and that'll give you a very striking pot as well. Now here's the big thing. Right site, right plant, soil. Soil is the thing where everybody wants to cheap out. And, oh, we had the soil in there from last year. We'll just use that again. No. What you have to understand now is the potting mixes that are sold, like Miracle Grow, have no soil in there and they have no innate nutrient value. They are mixes of bark or compost or coir, which is coconut fiber, vermiculite, and perlite. It could be any one of those. And Miracle Grow got smart many years ago, and they dumped a thimbleful of fertilizer in their Miracle Grow and said, complete for the season. It's a lot of baloney. You have to remember, every time you're watering and that water is flowing out of the bottom of the pot, whatever nutrients are in there are also going out on your patio or on your balcony. You have to replace those. So you have to be prepared. If you want pots that look like this and are full and whatever, you've got to be feeding them. And we'll go into that in just a second. I want to reiterate, don't be tempted to use last year's soil that you put the pots away in the garage. There's nothing there. All it does is hold the plants upright. So take it out to a spot where you see bare soil and dump it and break it up, and you put some organic matter in there and you haven't wasted it, but get fresh soil. Okay, I failed to mention, at the end I will take questions and answers, so it's very nice of you to all hold your questions, or else I'm explaining things so thoroughly that none of you have a question. Okay. Two biggest things about planting. What I like to do is get the pots, the plants that you are going to put in your container, and arrange them on the table the way they're going to go in the pot. And you'll have them pot to pot so you can see what your design is going to look like in the pot. How many of you have ever gotten beautiful, beautiful plants and you've started planting them and you're pouring soil in, and before you know it, a branch breaks here and a branch breaks there and whatever? There's a much simpler way. And if your neighbor's dozing, wake them up, and if they go home with this, they're much richer for it, I guarantee you. What you do is I use a small pot, a shallow pot. You fill this up to the base of whatever your deepest pot is going to be. So fill it up all the way across. And then if you want, and I'm kind of ahead of myself, how many of you have ever used Osmocote? Greatest thing since sliced bread. This is a plastic coated fertilizer that lasts for 4 months. And so when the neat thing about this is that the nutrient release, the plastic breakdown of the particles, is faster in hot weather. So when the plants are growing faster, the nutrient release is there to give them what they need. If it's cooler, it doesn't break down as quickly, and so the plants are not being overfed. And typically, if you really are pressed for time, but you still want to be a good plant parent, this lasts for 4 months. So you put this in the bottom level of the soil. So this is what that might look like. Can you see this?
So you put the soil in and then you put the Osmocote
on top of that first layer. And then, these pansies. And I don't have exactly the right size pots, but then you pack it, you go all the way around and pack the soil around the empty pots. That way you're not breaking branches. And then you pack it tightly with your fingers, and then what do? You lift the pot out, and a lot of times when you pour the soil in, it's stuck in one of the pots, so you can just use that to start filling around if there's any space there. So it's a really easy way. And then you pack firmly with your fingers, and then you do another layer of Osmocote on the top. And this is one time, one product where there's a little bit of slop. You're not going to burn with this product. So I think it's 1 teaspoon, 1 capful per 4 square feet. Well, that's for ground beds. So they're kind of bad in that they don't really give you a pot. Well, here, there's one. A teaspoon per 4-inch pot. Shaker can, really liberally. Like you'd salt and pepper your favorite thing that you salt and pepper, and you're not going to burn. It's not going to be possible. So this is a really good way to get your pots in without breaking and tearing up branches or ripping off flowers. Can we hear an ooh, ah? It means a little less when I have to coach you.
What's the name of that green container and where do you buy it?
The Osmocote? This fertilizer?
Yeah.
This is even, I always prefer that you go to an independent garden center, but if box stores have it. So you can find this at Lowe's, you can find this at the Big Orange, and it's Osmocote. Osmocote. It's there in the handout, I believe. Yes. Did you get that? Okay. Osmocote. You can buy it at a garden center, or you can buy it, if you have to, you can go to Lowe's, you can go to Home Depot, a lot of hardware stores that have shovels in a garden section. Osmocote.
Visual.
Is this better?
I'm gonna take a picture.
Yeah.
You can use it on flowers.
Well, there are 2 formulations. This particular one is a 14-14-14. And thank you, that's a perfect lead-in to the fertilization section. The numbers on a fertilizer container is, I gave an example here of a 14, 20, 12. So that first number, the 14, represents nitrogen. That is the nutrient that is most vital for leaf growth, stem growth, and what am I missing? Leaves and stem growth and stem elongation. So there are certain things, so like tomatoes. Tomatoes are very responsive to nitrogen. So you want to be very careful if you have a plot over here. You don't want to give a fertilizer that's high in nitrogen, and that would be really anything that's higher than 10%, because what you're going to have is tomatoes that are this tall at the expense of fruit, because the hormone balance is going to be thrown off by the nitrogen. So you're looking for phosphorus, the second number. That's what promotes blooms, roots, and that's what's going to give you fruit. So if nothing else, if you have, and it's all about ratio. So if you do a high nitrogen fertilizer, if that's all you've got and you're insisting on using that, then you have to make sure that the phosphorus is probably at least 1.5 times that. So if you had a 12, the second number should probably be at least 18 for things where you're really trying to promote flowers and fruit. And then the last one is phosphorus. And phosphorus is for cell health and therefore disease prevention. For perennials and other things that are perennial, like even trees and shrubs, it also promotes winter hardiness. So you don't need a lot, but you do want a phosphorus component in a fertilizer, and it will make a big difference, especially like in roses. That last fertilization of roses, if you were doing roses in a container, that last fertilization should have a good kick of at least 10% potassium, and that will help the plant develop better, stronger cell walls and make it get ready for winter. And everybody wants to know how often to fertilize. It depends upon how good a plant parent you are. If it's in shade, and if you put Osmocote in that first layer of soil, and then on the top, for a shade plant, a really dense shade plant, you're probably done. All you have to do is water, because there's a mistaken theory that if I put a plant in shade, the more I fertilize it, I can make up for the lack of sun. There is no correlation between that at all. And therefore, plants that are in shade or partial shade, you want to give them correspondingly less fertilizer, and especially really watch the nitrogen. Because if you put nitrogen on a pot of impatiens and they get an hour of sun a day, you're going to have impatiens. You're going to have impatiens that are this tall with 2 flowers on the end. So just remember, you can fertilize to some extent to get what you want. And you could even use, if you're using, and that's the other thing, if you're using a water-soluble fertilizer, one where you're putting a gallon, a teaspoon or tablespoon in a gallon of water, and most of you probably use Miracle-Gro. You can feed specifically. There are so many different analyses out there that you can feed for what you're looking for. And I don't expect you all to have 10 different fertilizers out in the garage. I do. But you use them for specific things. How many of you saw the promotional piece that Katie had with me up on a ladder? Did you see that? I was cutting the dahlias that were on over the eaves of the house. I literally had to get that. That was the first year I got here, and I didn't have enough to do, evidently, and I fertilized too much, and they got a little too much nitrogen, so they were blooming over the eave of the house. So I had to get on a ladder to cut them to make a bouquet. But that's just me. If you have plants that are out in sun, they can utilize more nutrients. So and there are those people that really want unbelievable pots. So they use the Osmocote at the time of planting, and then they wait 3 or 4 weeks, and then they go to water soluble. Because this is like the glass of orange juice. You're going to get the sugar, you're going to get the nutrients like that. This is going to be the slow, over time feeding. Clear? Cool. Okay. And when you don't, even if you don't go to a garden center and you go to a box store where the selection is more limited, you're still going to find multiple analysis that will be right for whatever you're doing. And you may need to have a couple of things in the garage based on whether you want to just feed them once, in which case you use the Osmocote, or the water soluble. The water solubles do tend to be higher in phosphorus. So if you really want to nudge things along like dahlias and roses and containers, you really want to put bloom on them. Even if you only do it once a month with the water soluble, you're going to have very different containers than you've ever had in the past. So, okay. Whether it's an indoor plant or whether it's your container out in the patio, the watering is the same. You water thoroughly enough until you see water draining out of the bottom of the container. That's the only way to know that you have thoroughly moistened the whole soil ball from top to bottom, and you're going to get root development from top to bottom when you make sure that soil is all moistened thoroughly. Now, the one thing about that, we've already talked about, you don't want it sitting in a saucer, because after 30 minutes, those roots, at the tips, are going to start dying, and you're going to see a corresponding loss of quality of plants above the pot. So pour it out, tip it out. Some people say, well, and this has been in my experience more about houseplants, but the pot is too big. I can't lift it. You want me to get the water out of there. What you do is you go to the dollar, I guess it's the $5 store now, and you find the least expensive cooking syringe, bulb syringe that you can find, and you go to that plant or that saucer with a bucket, and you bulb syringe it into there, and you don't have to break your back.
You can also use your turkey baster.
That's why I said you have one that's marked plants and you have one that's marked culinary. I'm not coming to Thanksgiving dinner at your house. The other important thing is, and I'm sure if I ask you and you were honest about it, at least half of you would put up your hands. Oh, I can't water my plants during the day. If I get a drop of water on them, that sun is going to go through there like a magnifying glass, and it's just going to fry that plant. Baloney. If you walk past a pot and that plant, or you see a plant or all the plants are wilted, you stop whatever you're doing and you go and water. Because every time a plant wilts, growth potential is lost. So for those of you that only care about tomatoes, every time you let that tomato wilt, you're pushing back the date that it's going to flower and fruit, and you're going to push back the size, you're going to lessen the size of those tomatoes. That's a stress factor. So you never, ever, ever walk past a wilted plant and not water it. And that also, I failed to mention, when you're potting, when you're doing your initial potting, never, ever plant a dry plant or a wilted plant. When you get it in the container, that water may be pushed aside by that dry soil. So you should always examine your plants in their little pots in your area waiting to be potted, and just check them either by heft or just put your finger there and make sure they're good and moist. And you'll start out with a lot better. They'll get off to a faster start that way. Okay, last thing. Deadheading. How many of you deadhead? Okay. Especially in the larger flowered things like geraniums. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. If you deadhead geraniums, how many of you grow geraniums? Here's a quick tip on geraniums. The best geraniums you'll ever have, you will put them in a pot by themselves because they have very demanding needs. They have very specific needs, and there are few things that like to sleep with them. So what you want to do is you do pots of geraniums. You water them when they're bone dry. You give them blazing sun, and you feed the heck out of them with phosphorus. And you will have those flower heads that you see in the greenhouses. They're very hungry feeders, but people put them in pots with other things, and they water the common denominator, and then the geraniums are too wet, and they start sulking. So, okay. This is a hard thing for people, and I would love to talk to our, I'm not sure who it is. I'm not sure if it's ground pros or if it's our staff, but we get these hanging baskets that start out beautifully, really beautifully. But you know what? When plants, it's like this container. Even if these plants were heat tolerant, if you expect this pot to be looking like this or anything like this, just bigger in the fall, it won't look like that without deadheading. So if you have, I've just noticed our baskets on the hangers out here, and this is a top view. So we put out baskets that are already full grown. And then what happens is you start getting this, what I call the donut. You get that empty hole in the center where it's shaded and there's been too much moisture and the leaves start drying off and dropping off. And, and they're hanging. So in side view, the petunias are all down here and whatever. So you've got this donut in the pot and you've got these strings down the side. Right, Sylvia?
Yeah.
So what you should do on things like, what else does this? Petunias and calibrachoa, the million bells that are a relative of petunias, they're pretty much the same. By the 4th of July, if you've bought a full basket in May, it's starting to look like heck by the middle of July or end of July. So what you do is you decide what a strong stomach you have and your tolerance for violence, and you go in and you cut at the top of the pot, you cut off a third all the way back to the pot. Or you can cut off 1/2, cut off everything on this side to the top of the pot, then flip it so the pretty is out here for now, and and feed it, and then in 2 to 3 weeks, this will have grown back out, and you don't have the flowers down here on the ground, scraping the ground. Or you can do it in thirds, do a third, then 10 days or 2 weeks later, do another third. And then, so after a month, you have this basket that looks fresh or fresher, but you really need to do this in conjunction with feeding, because that really brings them around because they've been cut. And pruning is a stimulus to growth, and that will cause them to all of a sudden say, oh, something's happened, and they start growing again. And they will do much better with the aid of a fertilizer, a water-soluble fertilizer. Gail?
I don't know if it's a good time for a question, but as far as deadheading geraniums, I have friends that deadhead, but just the top. And they need to go, don't they need to go to the...
That's a good point. Thank you, Gail. The question is, I have friends, I don't know anyone like that. They would know better. She said they just deadhead the top. Anytime you deadhead something, don't leave the stem sticking up like a thumb. Go all the way down into the plant, beneath the other foliage, and cut it off there. Because usually most plants, the next growing point will be right below that. And as long as that geranium is sitting there, even if it's a hybrid and it's sterile, it's still trying to make seed, and it's stopping the lateral stems that are below that. The hormones are controlling that and saying they're suppressing it. So as soon as you cut that off, the hormone balance changes and those side branches will start coming out. Okay? Last thing. I've never done this before, so I didn't know how long this was going to take, and I'm a little bit over, but then we'll do question and answers. All containers, whatever the material, all containers benefit from winter protection. So if you can't empty it and schlep it to a garage, just empty it and then turn it upside down. What you're trying to do is you don't want ice and snow in there, freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. It puts hairline cracks, whether it's ceramic, whether it's concrete. Even the plastic will do that. And it will shorten dramatically the life of your container. So empty that soil, and then next year, you go to the garage and you're not tempted to use that old spent soil all over again. So that's what I have for you. Yes, Sharon? What's my opinion of self-watering pots? I'm not crazy about them. Maybe for smaller pot. The question was, what do I think of the self-watering containers? I think maybe they're better indoors where you have smaller pots, but especially if there's only one lead or one spaghetti strap in there, it tends to, areas are going to be missed. And I don't think you develop as uniform and consistent as a root system as when you distribute the water all the way across the container. I'm sorry?
using milk
Huh?
and Christmas cactus for fertilizer.
No.
Oh, I heard. I'm processing. Why? I don't. Was this good housekeeping or something?
No, I think it was Google something.
Okay. Yeah. I don't. I think you're making work for yourself. Just go with your regular waterings, and if you're using a water soluble, and that goes back to your house plants. Don't, unless you have a ficus or something that is getting light all winter long and you can see it actively growing. When the day length and light intensity start shrinking in the fall, and those plants aren't growing and they're just stabilized, it's like force feeding someone that's not hungry. You're not doing the plant any favor. So all of my house plants, I stopped feeding them the last feeding is probably the end of September, and then nothing happens until March or April when the day length and the light intensity start increasing and you start seeing new growth. That's when the plant is, don't feed them if they're not using it. Okay? Yes,
About the bud
deadheading?
heading, I always had at my house the knockout roses that were beautiful, and I would cut them down, and they would bloom over and over again about 4 or 5 times until frost out. But now I notice here at the terrace, that all the rose bushes every year, all the dead is they don't cut them often, and there's a reason for that. Is it not cutting
Time,
down?
time,
Time.
time.
They don't
They don't take
take the time.
the time to get down. They should be cutting, they should look and examine a stem. They should examine a stem and they should look for the first buds and you prune that dead tissue out.
The green or whatever.
Yes,
Some of the green. I always cut mine down,
right.
but I notice every year they do not cut those.
And then it looks seedy at best because you've got the new growth coming up in those old brown stems. Now, don't say that I said anything though.
Must be a reason that they're not doing it.
It's simply a matter of time and budget. We have this many hours allotted. We'll do the best we can. And I'm not protecting them. So, but that's just, it gets down to time and money and budget. So, yes, sir.
Has anybody considered flying insects and the damage they cause?
For example,
I don't know.
can you be more specific? Like Japanese beetle
I
or?
don't know. You know more about it than I do.
Well, there are beneficial. Most of the insects, flying insects are beneficial.
They are?
Yes.
Like what? Bees?
Ladybugs, lady beetles.
Lady beetles?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I need a more specific question than that. But Japanese beetle, for example. Japanese beetle are not our friend. So that's something that you have to look at a control. But before you use a control product, make sure you're using it at a time of year when the insect is vulnerable. If they've already laid their eggs or if the adults don't feed and they just lay eggs and they've already laid their eggs, then why put a spray out into the environment if you don't have to? That really bugs the heck out of me when I walk through the hardware store and I see people homeowners grabbing things off the shelf and I think, what are they doing? Where are they going with this? And there's always a chemical solution, and that's not right. That's just not right.
Not right for the flowers, you say.
It's not right for our environment. So if you're going to have a mantra, it should be use the least amount of control, use the safest product that you can in the least amount. But use it at the right time. And generally speaking, on most insects, the control period is very limited. It's usually a few weeks. And once that's gone, why bother? You're wasting money and you're putting out things in the environment that don't need to go out there. Yes.
Question, there's a fertilizer, Miracle Grow does it, it's liquid form and you pour it into a little cup.
Hmm.
Do you know about that? Is that a healthy thing to do? I use it?
It's, Gail, it's all about the analysis. What am I going after? Am I feeding foliage plants? So I want more nitrogen and less phosphorus, or I just want the nitrogen down and I want the phosphorus up.
I want my geraniums to bloom beautifully, and that they have a tendency.
Do you have them in the front or in the back?
Yes, and it doesn't get enough sun.
It doesn't
I
get
know,
enough sun.
I have to give that up.
You're really
It's time
paddling
for me to-
upstream.
I know, I have to give that up. I've
Yeah.
been trying for 3 years.
You're a young girl with your life ahead of you.
Move
So
on, right?
move on. Absolutely. Yes. That question was already asked. No. And I don't really have a good answer. If they're getting in your pots, the lady suggested, and you can try it, but over the years, it's one of those things. You're dealing with individuals in a biological population. And it's just like Anne Marie likes asparagus, maybe Donna doesn't. So it may work and it may not. So try it for you. I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's organic. You're not going to hurt anything with cayenne pepper. But again, usually, like in the case of bulbs in the ground, it's the disturbed soil that intrigues them and they want to know what's in there. And then people see them digging up the crocus bulbs and say, I knew it. They're going after the crocus bulbs. That was just a bonus. They're really more intrigued by the smell of that soil that was disturbed, planting the bulbs in the crocus.
I found that when you plant a new pot, and if there's dirt exposed, because I don't usually fill the whole pot. I let it grow up. They'll dig right where there's the
Bare soil.
Bare soil, and that's when I sprinkle with cayenne pepper on that bare soil.
Yeah.
And they kind of get the message, this isn't a pot I want.
And we touched on it a little bit, but that spring pot is planted for spring. Because the minute it stays 90 degrees and stays that way, those things are going to start languishing and you're going to replant it. For your containers, you've got a whole growing season ahead of you. So space them a little bit farther apart and see some soil, and those plants are going to be healthier. Okay? Yes?
Amaryllis and poinsettia, what do I do in the summertime so that they will bloom again?
Well, I can really help you with the poinsettia. On January, the question is, what do I do with my poinsettia and my amaryllis? If it was me, if the poinsettia even got in the house, it wouldn't stay longer than 2 weeks.
Not worth it.
No, they're not worth it. Now, amaryllis you can grow on, but they're very heavy feeders. It requires a lot of nutrients to build that bulb up so that you have 2 or even 3 spikes next year. And I read an article once that said an amaryllis, if you save it over, every 4 leaves that you can keep on that plant all summer long until September, that should equal 1 flower stem. But you've got to start feeding them the minute they finish blooming. You've got to start really pushing them. They're like geraniums. They're very hungry.
So then through the summer, I feed and water.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
What do you feed them?
For the amaryllis, if you're trying to rebloom it the next year, you would use something like the Jax. That's the 20-20-20. That's high. You want that high phosphorus, Jerry, because you've got to build that up because those flowers are so big. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes.
Hydrangeas and soft grounds. I always heard that that's good to put around for hydrangeas.
A potted florist hydrangea. Are you talking about out in the garden? You've got better things to do with your time. Jerry, with the minimal effect of acidification you get from that, just put it in a compost pile. Yes, Sue.
I have an amaryllis that, I don't go.
Yeah.
You what?
I had an amaryllis.
Right,
And my daughter says, oh, no, she goes dormant. She says, don't bother. So all it did was sprout leaves.
right.
And now I cut it and cut the leaves off the stone. I'm working.
You should have come to this lecture earlier. Okay, an amaryllis, when an amaryllis finishes blooming, as soon as those flowers all fade, you cut it right back to the neck of the bulb. And then that's when you start feeding, because if those leaves aren't kept growing throughout the spring and summer until about September or early October, they won't have stored or made enough food and carbohydrates to rebloom the following year. Do you have any leaves on it?
I'm starting it.
You don't have any leaves on it right now? You don't have any leaves? Put that in with the poinsettia. Now, if you waited long enough, it might start reblooming, but it's going to be so stressed. It's if you get one little tiny spike and some little flowers like this, it's not worth it. Okay, yes?
Tony, how do you discourage mourning doves from nesting in the middle of your flower pot?
Every time, assuming you're a friend of animals and you don't put sharpened spears in there in the middle of the nest where they're nesting, it's one of those things where I would just, every time you see an accumulation, you pull it out, because it's just some little 8 or 10 or 12 little flat sticks, and they consider that a nest. So it just depends upon your conscience. Is it every year it happens?
Generally, my neighbor upstairs, he usually gets the mourning doves nesting and he leaves them alone.
And then the branches are coming down.
They're coming down by
Yeah. Well, it's a short nesting season. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Whoa. One more question.
With the poinsettias, I have one that's 5 years old. They will turn around, they keep them inside in the summertime, put them out in the sun. If you want them to bloom for Christmas, in October, you put them in a dark room for 12 hours. If you want them to bloom naturally, they will naturally bloom from January. And mine is like this, like this.
I appreciate everybody's opinion, but the thing that you failed to mention is when you're trying to rebloom them at home and you put them in that dark room and give them 12 hours of uninterrupted light, if you even crack the door for 3 seconds of light, that you've just lost a night of 12 hours.
I let mine do in January. Mine is blooming right now. It's been blooming since January.
Isn't it interesting? We all have different taste.
I'm just saying, but you can keep them, they get huge.
Well, and that's the other thing. People don't cut them back to keep them more, yeah. Good for you. Okay.
Thank you.